Both an artist and a teacher, his first job was at the Maryland Institute's College of Art in Baltimore in 1961. Since then, he has held teaching positions and been appointed as visiting artist at many universities, among them Manchester College of Art, England, American College of Switzerland in Switzerland, National Academy of Design in New York City, and Syracuse University School of Art, New York, where he has taught since 1971. His current exhibition here at the Cole Art Center is simply titled Jerome Witkin, Paintings and Drawings, and features 15 works that span some 30 years. Jack Rutberg is an art dealer, curator, and consultant with 40 years of experience. He established Jack Rutberg Fine Arts in Los Angeles in 1979, a gallery that deals in modern and contemporary art representing a wide range of artists. Over the years, his gallery has presented major exhibitions of important modern and contemporary European, American, and Latin American artists, including Arshel Gorky, Hans Burkhardt, Patrick Graham, Ruth Weisberg, Jerome Witkin, and Francis Zuniga, among others. In addition, the gallery has presented a wide range of solo exhibitions of major international artists, including but not limited to George Rouault, Katie Kolitz, Max Weber, Sam Francis, George Kondo, and Edward Ruchet. Currently, his gallery is presenting the first exhibition ever to feature the work of both Jerome Witkin and his twin brother, the photographer Joel Peter Witkin, appropriately titled Twin Visions. Would you help me in welcoming Jack and Jerome?
Thank you all. First, I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to be here. And I think you probably know it, but I think you're all very, very fortunate to have John Handley as your guiding light in the gallery. I've worked with John in the past, and truly a remarkable individual, and I think any institution is very fortunate to have him. But today it's my great pleasure and getting a little conversation going with Jerome Witkin, who I have known for some 20 years. And part of knowing is a great artist is the fact that you never really quite know them, and there are always discoveries to be made in their work and about them as persons. John elucidated about the fact that we're currently having an exhibition with his identical twin brother, Joel Peter Witkin. Many of you might know his work. For those that don't, Joel has been one of the most celebrated photographers in the world today, and these two identical twin brothers have had a very extraordinary life. And I think it's important to just pay just a moment of that, because artists are very seldom far removed from their personal lives. They're not separate things. Genuine artists go very deeply internally, and even if they can't sometimes articulate their sources and origins, they're entombed in some fashion or other. And what is remarkable here is you have what I regard as two of the most extraordinary and unique visions in all of modern art that have evolved in a manner that you would not expect of identical twins, but that art was so powerful in their own lives, beyond the familial issues that every family may and may not have, but in their pursuits, they evolved completely separate from one another, and have been, artistically at least, estranged for more than a half a century. Now that's a remarkable realization, and in their recent coming together only weeks ago, art in a sense brought them back together. It had the power to do that. And in this exhibition in Los Angeles, we've learned a great deal about both of them. Indeed, they've learned about each other, which for identical twins really means that they've learned about themselves. So as the art reveals itself to us, I think there are remarkable revelations that I can only imagine that Jerome perhaps views things ever so slightly differently. But I want to at least, Jerome, because many of the people in the audience you know very well, others you've never met before, and I'd like to contextualize the origins of who Jerome Witkin really is. So if you could address perhaps your earliest beginnings as an artist, and I think it's fair to say that you were somewhat of a prodigy early on, but perhaps share a bit of that with us, Jerome. As a young boy, how you came to discover art.
First of all, I decided not to say anything tonight.
I'll handle this.
Without my brother, I can't talk. It's a huge question.
That will mean that you get it half right.
Why not? Why not? I tell a story about this. One story is that when I think I was about 5, I was given a green pencil, and I would sharpen it up, and I would draw. And I kept drawing. And then as I sharpened the pencil, when it got very small, I thought, well, that's the end of my ability. I buried the pencil in a little box in a little part of the street I lived in, and I waited for the other green pencil to show up, or some other. But I decided to kind of go on the street with chalk and draw on the street. So I was always drawing. And the thing is, my mother, was very kind of concerned that, I was drawing maybe too much. But I was always a good student. And one day, it was a Saturday, near our tenement in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, there was a woman who suddenly shows up and sets up an easel. I wasn't aware of this. My mother said, go and see what she's going to do. So I quietly watched this lady set up this canvas and start painting these 2 rusty cars across from the alleyway of the tenement toward the boulevard. And I watched her, and I said to my mother, I want to have painting lessons. She said, well, first of all, we can't afford anything, barely any food here. Why should we get painting lessons? And on weekends, she would sometimes take my brother and sister and I to Macy's and Gimbel's in New York City, where she would shop, and we would just simply hang around. But I kept saying, I need to know if I can have, and I was 7 years old then, painting lessons. And she gave in. She said, okay, I'm going to take you on the subway to the museum, the Metropolitan Museum. We'll get off, we'll go into the museum, and I'll ask whoever if they offer painting lessons. So we got to the museum. It was a very hot day. I was wearing a little T-shirt and jeans and little sneakers, and we walked up these big steps. And the Metropolitan Museum in those days, 1947, was a kind of storehouse, warehouse, and a kind of place for archival work. It wasn't like today. It wasn't with the postcards in the stores. It was very kind of severe, like a mausoleum. So I was very stunned by the space, and my mother came back to me. She said, I checked with these women. They don't have painting lessons. But since we're here, why don't you go upstairs and look around, and we'll go out of here. So I was very disappointed, and I walked up these big stairs, and I got to some rooms, and for the first time I saw paintings and large rugs on the walls and some drawings. And I was walking around, no guards, and I suddenly found myself in this big room next to a fantastic painting. I was watching it. And suddenly I saw a man approach me. He had a very nice suit on. He was carrying a cane. And he walked up to me. And children, a fear authority, I guess. And I didn't know who he was. And I looked away. And then he put his cane on my sternum and pushed me on the ground. And then put pressure on the cane and said, little boys, little dirty boys like you should not be in museums like this. And he took the cane away, walked out, and I didn't tell my mother about this. So we went back home, and it didn't seem to faze me. I felt sorry for the guys in some way. I found out that he was Charles Rorimer, who was the Metropolitan Museum's director. He was also a brilliant student, I think, at Harvard, and was in charge of a younger group of men and some women as the Monuments Men. And he was, by himself, commanding the great finding of great art that the Nazis had hidden, and he unearthed that for the rest of our time. He also had 3 children, and he just had this phobia about kids in museums. So I did forgive him. But I also realized that the year he died was the same year that the Metropolitan Museum bought one of my paintings. So there's a tit for tat or something like that. But the thing I must say about that question about art, I always felt I was made for it. Like the first time I held a brush, it was like, this is correct. Canvas. My first job as a 15-year-old kid at the Skowhegan School was to make paint. And it was wonderful to kind of have live chemistry. I learned how to do and analyze, what that color was and how to make it and all that stuff.
Jerome, if I could interrupt for just a moment. Rolling off your tongue at 15 years old at the Skowhegan School of Art in and of itself is a little bit of a story. Can you just, how did you go from being a young adolescent to being at the Skowhegan School, one of the most prestigious institutions, at the age of 15?
Good question. Well, here's the thing. In New York City, there was a very large Scholastic Art Award thing, and I was in a high school of music and art, which was a very premier high school, one of the 5 best in New York City, on the City College campus. And a few people really looked at my drawings and felt they were done by a much older person. And one of these people was Art Kane, who was one of the Monuments Men, and also the art director for 17 magazine. He really liked drawing, and he found a way to call up my mother's phone number, and he asked me to come over to the magazine. He gave me a short story for the magazine's yearly It's All Yours teenage issue, where there's illustrations and stories. And he said, read this story, and if you have an idea for a drawing, do the drawing and bring it in. Well, I had my sister Sarah and my brother Joel pose for me in this little stairwell, and I composed them, and I drew this drawing, and it seemed to take forever. My mother would be calling me like last minute Jerry, because she said, hurry up and get it done. I mean, we don't know when they're going to call this thing off. So I did make the drawing. I felt good about it. I took the subway into the city, and I showed Art Kane this thing, and he very much liked it, and it was published. And in high school, I became this like superstar because I was actually in a magazine. And the guy who was running the art department was a wonderful man, and he congratulated me. He said, stay calm about this. This is a big deal. And Art Kane made it bigger because he said, we got you into the Skowhegan School. You are very young, but at the same time, you've never met real heavy-duty artists. So I never was traveling away from Brooklyn or New York City. I was on an airplane going to the Skowhegan Airport in Maine, and I got out, and I was a child. And all these people were about average age of 26 to 30. And I was given the job, because I was not exactly, a muscle guy, of taking an old German man from his cottage with his German wife. He was an alcoholic, and I had to take him every morning after breakfast, and I would take him through the woods so he wouldn't plant little whiskey bottles or cognac along the way. And I took him through the studio and gave him to go to his studio. At 5 o'clock, I left my studio, picked him up, and we walked back to the woods. All the time, every day of 2 months, except for Sundays, he was telling me about his life in Germany, Nazi Germany or pre-Nazi Germany, or after he left Germany, and who all he met. And I have a pretty good memory, and I would go to my little bed, and think about what he said, and think about all these people at the school. It was a very rich experience. And in the course of the 2 months, the stories got really interesting and involved the Bauhaus and Paul Klee and, Schmidt-Rottluff and Nolde and, his trial among the Nazis and how he had to run out of the country and he was afraid of his life half the time. And he loved drawing and all that. Well, he gave a lecture, and finally I saw the work. And his name was George Gross, which was really remarkable. And I said to myself, well, I don't understand all this stuff. I don't know what fear means and what Nazis really are. I was a kid. But then when I went back to high school, I did a lot of reading, and I made myself realize the history of what he was talking about. And I found myself during the high school to visit people like Jack Levine. He was having a show at the Whitney Museum, also a kind of social realist. I also found myself from Skowhegan meeting Isabel Bishop there, and I would visit her in her studio. And so I was having this very sort of incredible journey of not being around people my age, but people who are much older and much deeper and much more seasoned in so many things. So I was really having a great time. And that maybe explains the Skowhegan School. I went back there 2 years later, and my roommate was Johnny Shawn, the son of Ben Shawn. And Ben actually adopted me that summer. And he would take me to where the luncheon area was, and I would show him a painting of his or two. And he actually took the time to explain how he made those paintings. So I was having this incredible, in my previous life, I think I was a blind and crippled child or something. Because I was given this enormous jump from having almost too rich. It was almost too rich. And I proceeded to go to people's studios on weekends, like Saturdays, and knock on their doors. And they actually would let me in. So I met a lot of different people. At Cooper Union, which I went later, we had the Cedar Bar. And of course, it's not like I'm dropping names all the time. I'm not. These people were like uncles. They came to my mother's house sometimes for dinner, lasagna, pizza, whatever. And it was really real to me. These people were real. And it wasn't like looking at a book, at a reproduction, saying that, who is this person? I could actually talk to these people. And the Cedar Bar was around, and you could just sit down with Franz Klein and say, how was your day, Franz? And it was very like, it was really like a magic tour of contemporary art. And in Cooper, I loved the idea of abstract expressionist painting. I mean, just deep diving into the paint. And we would buy for very cheap these neti, like little like cold cream jars of pigment. Open them up and slather the stuff on. I mean, I would go home looking like I just was thrown into a paint factory or something. And it was really good. At the same time, at one point, I said to my mother, as much as this abstract is good, I really miss the figures. So she said, well, why don't you start a picture here? And I stretched a 6 by 4 foot canvas, and it was made with jute canvas. It was okay. And I began this large narrative painting. And it took me about a year and a half. And suddenly I said to my mom, I said, I cannot resolve the painting. It's got problems I never even faced before. And I got to give it up. So why don't you let me destroy it? And she said, no, I've seen you do it, and I was then a heavy Camel smoker then, like 2 packs a day. And I said, well, you can have it. She says, okay, I'll give you $25 and I'll give you 2 cartons of Camel cigarettes. I said, wonderful, it's yours. I mean, you finish it.
As only a mother could.
Who is this woman? So I left to have a day in the city, and I came back that night, and she said to me, listen, tomorrow morning, finish my picture. And she's my mother, and I couldn't say no. I mean, she could punch me out, she could hit me. She's a pretty wild lady. But so I said, okay, you're right. You own it. So I spent the next, 2 months, and it did kind of open up. It did resolve itself. And then there was this, my end of Cooper Union was coming up, and then I heard about the National Academy of Design. They had an art student to receive the Pulitzer Prize. I mean, that's now finished, but I applied for that. And then I got a local trucker to take this picture called Genesis through Brooklyn, Queens rather, into Manhattan. We left it there, and in 2 weeks I was told I did win the Pulitzer Prize. And my mother was very happy. And she told me not to smoke anymore. I mean. So with the money, I was also told from Cooper that I had a free ride to Yale, graduate school. And I was so tired of being a student. I said, listen, I want to go to Europe. I want to go beyond the reproductions. I want to see everything there. I mean, I'll go there. I'll take maybe $2,000 and see what that looks like. So I took a boat, the Holland American Line, got into Rotterdam. Rotterdam, I went to Amsterdam, and I made an express train ride to Colmar on the Alsace-French-German border. And I had to see the Eisenheim altarpiece by Matthias Grunwald. And I spent a day there, and I was so high with the power of that picture and the story of that picture. And all the time, I didn't know what to do with all this information. Of course, we grow up. And so I went back to Amsterdam. I found myself later seeing the museums. Then I went to Florence. I stayed there for 4 months and 9 months in Rome. And it was wonderful. Then my father died. And I got a telegram. And because as a Jew, he would be waiting for his gravesite, my mother came to pick me up and have a little vacation also. And we went back to Brooklyn. I finished my time at his grave in stone. And I found myself saying, well, here I am. What do I do with all this information? I've just lost my father. What do I do with the rest of my life? And then I found out that being a painter is very difficult because you need time in the studio. And I needed a part-time job, and maybe I'd be a waiter or something. And with the extra money from the Pulitzer, I got a little rent-control apartment in Bank Street in the West Village. And I was worried about my rent, and I couldn't find a job, and I was still painting and drawing. And out of the blue, I applied for a Guggenheim Fellowship, and I got that too, which was enormously strange because I was so young still. I was only 21. And so I was too lucky, I guess. And then I got a phone call from the Maryland Institute. They said, we want you to teach here. And I was so horrified because I never taught before. And I knew that the first 2 years there, I would have to be painfully terrible, until I learned how to teach better, which I did eventually, I hope. And there I met my wife, and then I got married, and we went to Holland, and that's part of the story.
But Jerome, I want to kind of truncate things, because time is really elusive here. We don't have the time. But in Europe, you had encountered also some extraordinarily rich relationships. Yes. I don't know about relationships, but encounters with very major figures of the 20th century. Right. I mean, at that young age, you've already somehow bounced off of some of the major figures of the time. Yep. Most people don't get that opportunity in a lifetime. But then you go to Europe, and just touch very briefly on some of the people that you encountered even there that informed your sensibilities.
Thank you. I do ramble. But the thing is,
I'm
so interesting. But the thing is, I was living in Florence, and my 21st birthday showed up, and I spent the evening writing a letter to my mother. I mean, thanking her for being such a great mother, and I was really meaningful. It was very touching. She was a great woman, a single mother, and she really tried her guts out. Anyway, so I put the letter down, and I walked in this cool night in September over the Ponte Vecchio, and my Italian was then very good. And coming on the other side of the bridge was this enormously gorgeous woman, this young German girl. And we conversed and all that, and she knew Italian. She and her friend helped me write a letter to Giorgio Morandi, who I wanted very much to meet. And so the letter said, this is my birthday week, can I travel up to you in Bologna, and would you possibly see me on a day soon, like a Wednesday? And we got a letter back very fast, and she drove me to Bologna at the Via Fandazza, and I rang the bell, and Morandi's sister came out. Of the two sisters, they put me in a chair, and they said, "This is the day," in Italian, "that Giorgio sees guests." So one man passed me, who I vaguely remember as a film director, and I was in next. And I went to his little studio, a little studio, with like little bottles with dust around them like that. And there he was. He was a 71-year-old man. I was 21, and 50 years of huge gapping experience here. And I gave him two of my drawings called Disegni. I said, please take this as a regalo, as a gift. And he said, oh, let me give you two of my drawings. He opened the cabinet, he says, they're not here. And I said, well, okay. but of course, I'm in the presence of a man who is so special, so amazing. He's called the greatest painter in Italy and maybe the world at that point. And we're chatting away, and I'm saying to myself, me, the schmucky little boy from Brooklyn, and you, this incredibly deep man, why are you bothering with me? But it's the story of my life, I think. You know, so many doors are opening. So we had a nice time, and I just shook his hand. I said, thank you so much. This means so much. And you know, the next week, I found myself seeing Phil Guston in Florence. They were about to go to Venice for the Biennale, and there's a lot of people there. You know, Rothko de Kooning were coming up, Clifford Still. But I had a nice chat with Philip, because he's like an art uncle then, and we were talking about Morandi and a lot of things. And we're drinking grappa, you know, like pure alcohol. And so after I kind of crawled back to my, you know, my apartment, it was interesting. But it was a great 21st birthday, I'll put it that way.
Indeed.
So, you know, I've been so lucky. And yet at the same time, the core of all this luck was, I think that's your initial question, like, why did you, or how did you become an artist? And I really am very much a deist. I believe in God. I think God put Joey and me in my mother's little womb, and we were supposed to be who we became. You know, I always felt that. Like, no ifs or buts. He was going to be a photographer. I was going to be a painter. And, you know, I think we're little munchkins that make art, I can tell you.
If I may, and I know there were other encounters, I think Schmidt-Rottluff, and,
oh, yeah.
You know, some profound experiences in both Germany and Poland that subsequently. Mm-hmm. I'd like to just say that I sincerely believe that Jerome is one of the great painters of our time. And what distinguishes that is, you know, when you're talking about the history of figurative painting, when classicism and abstraction comes to bear, it's extraordinary for someone to bring a unique vision, a different sensibility than we've ever seen. What is so remarkable, in fact, between Jerome and his identical twin is I could be saying the very same thing about his brother. Once you see a large body of work of Jerome Witkin and Joel Peter Witkin as well, you will forevermore realize that these are unique visions. Now that's a remarkable statement given our repertoire of visual history. And I'd like to just address the fact that you're going to see, if you haven't already seen an exhibition, this is not, you know, the gallery is incapable of presenting Jerome Witkin. What you're seeing are touchstones. You can't quite fill in those blanks, but these are all touchstones that merely example aspects of an artist. And I think there are attributes about Jerome's painting that are truly remarkable. Both the viewer has a privileged perspective. You understand that you're not only looking at a painting, but you're witnessing something. And regardless of where you stand, it's a unique perspective in a sense. The other quality that I'm awed by, in knowing this body of work for many years, is that Jerome is not an artist who delineates anything. He's able to evoke everything. And that's the remarkable accomplishment. You know, filmmakers take hours to tell a story. Jerome, in a single frame, you can move through those paintings in a very, very extraordinary way. The one thing that I would, if you want to really experience an exercise in viewing, go back to the paintings after you thought you've seen them and enter the picture from a completely different place. Nothing is thrown away, everything is considered and given great importance. So as a viewer, I'm always humbled by Jerome Witkin. But I want to address certain, perhaps the most remarkable aspect, or certainly a distinctive one, is Jerome's long process of reflecting upon the Holocaust. I think the Holocaust is responsible for some of the worst art imaginable, because artists who feel a passion to tell this story are incapable of doing so. And that's why the greatest work devoted to the Holocaust has been dealt in symbolic or abstract fashion. Jerome is able to give you something much, much, much more. And you will see in this exhibition one remarkable painting. But Jerome, maybe you can talk about that experience, even visiting Germany or the camps, and perhaps just address that for just a bit.
Right. You know, I don't mind being foolish. You know, I don't mind being odd or, you know, just spontaneous in a comment. But I think Bobby Weiss here, who's a wonderful person, by the way, he made a statement recently which sums everything up. He says, the trouble with contemporary art is people are afraid of content. And my sense of content is, as the French would have it, like in the days of Juror, their work, the salon work, these huge canvases, they would try to make such a difficult object with such complexity that they would refer to them in French as une grande machine, the great clockwork, the machinery of all the parts working. And when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, I had a moment where I said, you know, I'm doing collages and all this stuff, and I really would like to make something that is about human suffering, human pain, how it is to live. And because of a lot of other moments in my life, my grandmother was a cripple, people who I knew died young, and the history of World War II, and my father being a Jewish man in a history of his own family coming from the shtetls of Eastern Europe, I began to think in terms of maybe I should, when I went to Syracuse for the first year, maybe I should do something that might start my interest in that history. And I was at, you know, things happen in their own way, and they happen correctly. I was at the post office my third year at Syracuse, waiting in line, and there's a little man in front of me, a little tiny guy, bald head, and he had a beard here and a beard kind of here, and he had this little green jacket on. And we were just waiting so long, and I said to him, "Who are you?" You know? And he turned around and says, "Oh, I'm a professional imp." And I said, "What?" And I said, "Come on, who are you?" He says, "Well, no, I'm really from a different place." And I said, "But you're here going to the post office." I said, "I see you as a devil." I said, "What if I painted you as a devil?" So the guy picked up on this and said, "Sounds good." And so it happened to be down the road, a building where Syracuse Stage had their costumes. And I fitted this guy for this amazing little costume. And he loved it. And I said, "Listen, you have a car. Be at my studio tomorrow. I'll make a chair. I'll get a chair. I'll light you up, and we'll do some drawings." That's how I start. And the thing that's interesting, like in the Bible, in the New Testament, Jesus says to his disciples who had a bad fishing day, and they had to come and get fishes to feed these people. Jesus says to the fishermen, no, you didn't go deep enough. Go and take the boats deeper, and you'll find the fish. And Larry Wills, in his book on what Jesus meant, makes a very good parallel to making art, I think. Because that guy is the devil. I said to myself, intellectually, this is the most hokey thing to paint, the devil, you know? But it was so incredibly preposterous and so difficult to kind of make it that it went beyond the banal that I liked it. And I began drawing and drawing until the thing got so richer that I had to start painting. And this guy was really into it, you know? And I was into it too. So the foolishness can be maybe very creative and very deep. So just as Jesus talked about, you must go to deep, deep water. I think when I try to make a picture, I know it's going to be difficult. I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to exhaust me. But then that's my thing. I want to be in deep water. You know, I want to be in trouble. And taking on the Holocaust, because it starts with the devil as a tailor. And by the way, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, the most liberal paper in Germany, the title in German, the headline was, "Up Jumps the Devil." And that was the first, and I had the idea of the devil first, and then I would do a chronological order of the Shoah, or the Holocaust, and go from there. And so 40% of my work has been to take myself to survivors, take myself to Auschwitz in Poland, take myself to conversations with scholars, and get it deeper and deeper. And just a month ago, I did finish my last 11th image of the Holocaust, and it takes place in 1945 at most American movie theaters, because for the first time pre-television, the Movietone News showed to an innocent public in this country the Belsen-Bergen film by the British, the Auschwitzian images by the Russians, other movies from the Americans, from Buchenwald, and people were just shocked. And I was 4 years old and not 40 years old, but I was able to make these paintings because I wanted to make those paintings. Even though I knew intellectually they would be hard to show, hard to sell, but I felt that was my great dream, you know. And I'd rather be a magnificent fool than to be an easy fool, you know. I'd rather, as Alice Neal says, you know, if they're going to shoot me as a sheep, better they shoot me as a wolf. So, you know, I did what I did, and I feel good about it. Yeah. I think I feel good about it because it does have substance, it does have meaning, you can share it, and you can sit in front of it and reconstruct it, think about it, and it's not just a glance, it's maybe a deeper thing.
I will say that some of those paintings initially are rather horrific, but as I commonly say, that it's very easy to make a horrific painting. It's very easy to make something grotesque, but to imbue it with humanity and empathy is the challenge that really any artist would find daunting. And these paintings so transcend the horror by virtue of humanity that they are, in my mind, the greatest depictions on the subject. And if there is something of a cliche to say about Jerome's paintings, is that he's able to depict the undescribable. And we have actually, I mentioned it earlier today, I have seen 3 examples where lives were changed from Holocaust survivors who had encountered those paintings. We're too short on time, I think, for me to tell any of those stories, but they are truly profound. And when I say, we're not talking just an impact, but life-changing. And the power of art can be something so far beyond the decorative, so far beyond the superficial. And frankly, as an art dealer, I've been somewhat ruined by the fact that I know that.
I'd also like to add to that this man of 20 years of our knowledge and friendship is such a deep appreciator of risk and poetry, and not the sellable, easy stuff. And I think his reputation among artists and other dealers is huge and of great admiration. So I feel I'm so lucky to have Jack. And
mutual.
He's what he is.
Yeah, we're stuck with each other. But Jerome, just because we're so short on time, maybe we're going to fast forward. I hope you'll all go to the web, look at some of the, they're hugely inadequate. When you see an image on a computer screen that's this big, and imagine it having been reduced from 30 feet, 25 feet, 16 feet, what have you, to this, what are you really getting? I mean, but at least you'll understand compositionally some of the subjects. But a more perhaps hopeful painting, certainly, reflective and painting on the subject is in the gallery. And maybe you just say a few words about that, because I really want to touch bases on other things, and we are so desperate on time, I know. So perhaps let's just talk about that, and then I want to ask you about another painting. One of the paintings deals with, was the last painting of the Holocaust. I've heard Jerome say, I've just made the last painting of the Holocaust. I've heard that for 20 years. It's a subject that I think is impossible to leave for obvious reasons. Yes. But please, Jerome, we just say just a short words.
About the last picture?
About, no, the painting that they're going to see in the gallery. This is a detail of it.
It's called The Two of Us, and it's a diptych. And the railroad track is the track, of course. I spent a week at Auschwitz walking around the railhead that Mengele was there and all that. But I wanted to make a picture about hope. And there were possibilities of some babies or 2 or 3-year-old kids who actually were somehow born, and the Russians did document these kids at Auschwitz. I wanted to have my friend Stacy French pose for me, and the woman is so good. She actually looked the part, and she was a mother, and she held this sort of bunch of doll and diaper or something against herself, and I have a stage in my studio. I can light them up like a little theater, and I lit her up, and it looks so great. So I first got, I've seen a lot of those vehicles that move people, so I painted that from photographs and pieces of wood and all that business. There were some like clothes from the garments they wore, and she took the pose, and the model is so good because she gave me such intensity that you couldn't get that from anything like a photograph. You got that from life, the vibe. And then she moved to this other thing, other large painting. I had just come back from my first and only trip so far to Israel, Jerusalem, and I knew the history of the migration in '52, the big migration into Jerusalem. And so I made a picnic, the same woman, the same color code. She's with the boy, about to launch an airplane. He survived that with her. And the picture becomes an idea of the settlement of Israel. And the plane goes into the dark danger of the politics of that country, which is always with us, it seems.
And Jerome, another extraordinary, I think one of the great masterpieces, frankly, is Subway Marriage, that you will see another painting, a multi-panel painting. One of the attributes that Jerome has, I think, is that not only does he have a unique vision and the obvious facility, but I think he may be one of maybe the first great master of our time who really has so absorbed film and cinematic possibilities, and even using devices, as you will see, he'll use different scale paintings to multi-panels. Not so much in this exhibition, except the one exception, but in Subway a Marriage, you can't even perceive the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, every panel is 6 inches wider than the other. He knows how to move you through a painting, and you don't know quite why. But it's a remarkable, remarkable cinematic story that begs all kinds of interpretations, but I know there are a real basis
quick
for it.
Additive to that. When I was a child, movies were like 12 cents, and where my neighborhood, they were like just crappy little movie houses. But I was always taken by the little promo, the photograph of a piece of that movie with a big title over it. And I would say, even with my comic books, I would not read my comic books. I would just look at the pictures and make up my own stories. If I made a movie, I'd make the movie just to kind of have 3 or 5 or 6 stills that would say the core of that narrative. So I do have a great love for movies, but I have a greater love for how to boil down an image so that it's legible and it can evoke many, many thoughts in its short duration. And I really love Japanese and Chinese scroll paintings because that also has about time. And so all that stuff comes out by work. And that picture took a lot of work. And it was a kind of story about the end of my first marriage too. And again, I took chances by using voodoo on this dark woman, killing this like person, and the man standing takes the pain, and then he wakes up. And all those things became devices and difficulties, which I love playing with. Like, there's some people who are engineers, they love the problem. I love the problem of solving an image. That's what I want to say.
Evocation is really the issue. I know we're limited for time.
We've got about 10 minutes.
Well,
why don't we take a couple of questions from the audience and repeat the questions so that it can...
Yeah, sure. Questions. You've heard it all.
Yeah.
I would say to you that you've gotten the short story here.
I want to hear a question.
Yeah, that's what we're
I have this medical problem called severe projectile vomiting. If I don't hear a question, I go nuts. I mean, you might get soaked.
In the back there.
You mentioned that the exhibit here is just a small part of Mr. Witkin's work. Where can we see more of it?
Well, the question is, where can one see more of the work? Certainly, if you want to get on a plane to come to Los Angeles at the moment, you'll see more work. And it isn't easy to show Jerome Witkin's works. You know, when you're talking about an artist who likes to create paintings of a scale that are institutional scale, that limits things sometimes. But there was a touring museum show. One has to watch these things. I wouldn't make apologies for this show, by the way. It is a powerful and poignant opportunity. But right now in Los Angeles, there will be other shows that we'll stay tuned, is all I can say. We're hoping even to extend the Twin Visions show into a museum tour. But Jerome is we're often lending works to institutions in, again, limited scale. So for the moment, there's some wonderful publications, and the web is not a great way to learn anything, but it certainly is a hint.
I can add to that. At the end of this month, a book is coming out, 20 figurative artists. I'm one of them. And we each had 10 pages to make statements. And then there's a lot of reproductions. And I've yet to see the book. It's coming out. And I think those are good tools because I think we have to dialogue, with readers or viewers to tell you how we got somewhere, So, again, talking about my lucky life, I guess. I was privileged to see and talk to people. And I think it's the maturation to be an artist or a writer or a poet. The maturation is everything. And I've been lucky to have that time to mature.
Other question? Yes?
In your teaching, do you ever find a little you? And the person put the cane on you and said, "Little dirty little boy, stay out of here."
Yes.
Do you find people that are so passionate when they're so young about the same art?
It's a good question. My first day of teaching, I dress up and wear a cane. I mean, yeah, it might work. No, but the thing is, you know, I'm a very hard teacher, I think. I'm even insulting because they have to remember something. And just last week in my introduction class for painting, these kids were so afraid of paint. I did demonstration for them. I did underpainting, grisaille, you know, glazes, in painting, the whole thing. And I said, well, you know, now you do it. And they were like afraid of these little tubes. It was weird. So I said, listen, now we're bringing in a model, and she's going to be here for a number of weeks. I said, you've got to make something unconventional, something that has attitude. And I said, if you don't do that, I'm bringing in next week a professional tattooist. He'll write on your back of your neck, chicken shit. And you'll forever live with that terrible thing. And I know it's terrible to say, but they'll remember it.
Another, yes.
Can you walk us through this painting that you have up here and tell us the process on each panel?
On Subway, the marriage.
Subway, well, very quickly. Well, the first idea for the painting came out of a Newsweek magazine of a cop in full regalia with his gun against the New York subway wall with graffiti. And it was pretty bad in the 70s, New York. So I had the idea, I was about to divorce my first wife, and I felt very much like that cop, I mean, vulnerable. And I said, what's more vulnerable than a guy in pajamas in a subway car? So actually I built a subway car, the back of a car with some help with graffiti and this chair. And I had this guy, Steve Healy, pose for it in a pajama I bought for him. A very nice guy. And that was the first painting on your left. The second one was the voodoo idea of this nightmare dream person about to kill the child, or the child man, and he is physically taking the pain by gesture. He's bleeding as the kid in the third is bleeding, and then the guy wakes up. I even have him having a little urine stain on his pajamas because the dream was so bad. And the wife comes up. In the middle of that picture is her contact with him. And the woman in the picture is supposed to be my first wife, who's a Dutch woman, Kini Pompen, who actually died the last day of last year. I went to Holland to give and offer my eulogy to her and be with my children, who, you know, were of course there. They took her body from France back to Holland. And so, you know, life is fascinating. And, you know, my only statement is that, you know, I'm getting close to my own end, I guess. And I was talking to my wife as she was driving me to the airport to come here. And she said, listen, when you die, we'll have a very simple ceremony, okay? I said, yeah. I said, just, you know, burn me and earn me.
Yes, a good way to end. We'll converse more in front of the paintings, and thank you all for being here, and thanks for allowing us to be here.